Malifaux Minis can be a little bit complex and fiddly to assemble. So in this video, I've got 7 tips to make it just a little bit easier for you. I'm Dave. Now, before we get started with the tips, I am going to say there's some in here that I don't think I've heard anyone else mention before. So make sure you stick around and see if any of them surprise you. Tip number 1 is get yourself some new hobby blades. So the parts in Malifaux tend to be really small, and when we're cleaning them up, it's hard to use a lot of pressure with such small parts. So we need nice, new, sharp blades. If your blades are old and dull, then you're gonna have to use more pressure, which means that you risk bending the parts or snapping them or doing all sorts of bad things. So it's easier just to have nice, new, sharp blades. Tip number 2 is assembly instructions. Now, I'm not sure if everyone knows about this, but there is actually assembly instructions on the Weird website. They're not in the box when you buy them, but yeah, if you go to the Weird website and search for them, you can find assembly instructions for all the models. I'll have a link below directly to the assembly instructions page, or you can just type in like Captain Zip core box assembly, and you'll probably find them on Google as well. If you're finding this video useful, then please give it a thumbs up and let me know of any other tips that you have for making assembly a bit easier. So the next tip is all about glue. Now these are plastic models, so we're going to be using plastic glue. Get that super glue out of here. But we can actually use different types of plastic glue to make our life a bit easier. The 2 types of plastic glue I'm going to talk about is firstly our regular plastic glue, which is kind of thick and gloopy, and the second type is Tamiya extra thin plastic glue, which is, well, extra thin. So regular plastic glue, it's not my favorite, but it has 2 properties which make it useful sometimes. The first thing is it's thick, so it can kind of fill gaps a little bit. And the second thing is it's stickier than the extra thin glue. Now these 2 properties means I like to use the thick glue when there's parts that don't quite fit together properly and they kind of need a little bit of gap filling. The other time I like to use the thick plastic glue is when the parts have very small contact points, as we need that glue to be sticky to hold the parts in place while it dries. One little tip with plastic glue is if you squeeze it onto a cocktail stick, that lets you be a bit more precise in applying it. Okay, now Tamiya extra thin glue is my preferred glue for a couple of different reasons. Firstly, it's really thin and the bottle has a little brush inside the lid. And that means with the brush, you can actually paint it on very precisely exactly where you want the glue to go and not where you don't want it to go. So you don't get all those overflow issues. Secondly, because it's really thin, when you squeeze 2 parts together, you don't get all that glue squeezing out like you do with thick plastic glue. So generally, I like to use the Tamiya extra thin because it's just a nicer experience and you can be a lot more precise with the glue. My next tip is to let your glue fully dry before you move on to the next part. A lot of these Malifaux Minis have, you know, like an arm that's connected to a hand that's connected to a weapon. And if you are messing around before the previous part has fully dried, then you can cause yourself lots of issues. For example, for the first mate, I glued his foot onto his leg, and then I tried to glue his leg onto his body. But because I didn't let it dry fully, as I glued the leg onto the body, I basically broke his ankle and it went all floppy. Then I had to sort of apply a little bit more glue and try and move his ankle back into place and get it all lined up again, and it was a bit of a mess. So yeah, once you've glued a part, put it aside, work on another model or another part of your model so that it can fully dry. Just over halfway now. If you're finding the video useful, then give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more Malifaux content. My next tip is all about the order of how you assemble the parts for your minis. Because these Malifaux Minis are so spindly, it's easy for them to be misaligned and be sticking at funny angles. What I mean is, start with the body of the mini or the torso and then work out from there. What I've found is that it's really easy to get your hands or the feet of the mini misaligned. And if that happens, then maybe the hands aren't holding the gun properly and there's weird gaps, or the feet aren't level, so the Mini is going to be at an angle when it's standing on the base. That's what happened to my first mate. I did the feet first, and then when I attached the feet to the legs and then the legs to the body, the feet were at the wrong angles. So my first mate was going to be all askew. Now what I should have done is start with the body, attached the legs to the body, and finally the feet to the legs, so then I could level the feet while they're, the glue was still wet, and then it would have been a lot cleaner. So yeah, generally think about the order of how you're putting the Mini together, and make sure all the ones that require really fine alignment you do last, so you have the context of the rest of the Mini to make sure that there's not going to be any weird gaps left. My next tip is about how to hold the parts after they've been glued together. Have you ever had that experience where you glue two parts together and you put it down, then later you realize the parts have drooped or they've been knocked by something and now they're no longer aligned? It kind of sucks bad, eh? What I've been doing is I've been taking a ball of Bluetac or poster putty and sticking my Mini into the Bluetac. Then what I do is I'll take the Mini and I will stick it to my desk or to my shelves with the Bluetac. And then what I do is I actually align it so that gravity won't cause any of the parts to droop. If it's if it's like say a big arm that I've just glued on, I won't have the arm sticking out like this because then gravity will make it droop, right? What I'll do is I'll, put the Mini this way so that the arm is upright, and then the gravity won't cause it to droop because, it'll be pushing down on it instead of, like this way, it'll push down on it like that and cause it to droop. And yeah, I've found it really good. So it keeps it out of the way and prevents all the droopage issues. Okay, the final tip I've got for you guys. Now this is really relevant for Malifaux because there's so many tiny parts in it. So this tip we're going to be using Bluetac again. What we do this time though is we actually use the Bluetac to help us glue the parts together. So if we have a really tiny piece that we need to glue on, but using our fingers is going to be too difficult to hold the piece as we actually put them together, then we're going to use Bluetac. So what I'll do is I'll get some Bluetac, I'll hold the Bluetac, and then I'll actually use the Bluetac to pick up the piece. And then with that, I can, put the two pieces together. Now, once they're together, the glue will actually grab the pieces and hold them together because, it's melting them together like that, right? And then what I'll do is I'll twist the Bluetac off and it will come off the part, and I will just press down on the part with my finger to make sure they've got a good bond. But yeah, picking up the tiny little pieces with a ball of Bluetac is super helpful if you can't get your fingers in there on the part itself. So those are my 7 tips. I hope you've found them useful. Please let me know in the comments down below if you've got any more tips for me. If you've liked this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more Malifaux content. Cheers.